Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of Hunting the Bismarck from Extra History. You guys, the response was incredible to part 1 yesterday. It's one of our most viewed videos in quite a while. So you're obviously enjoying this series. I'm excited to dive into part 2. I'm told there are 4 parts to this series. There may be a break tomorrow. We'll see if I can record 2 episodes today, because tomorrow morning I'm flying to Georgia. I am going to try to do some reaction videos from my hotel room in Georgia if I'm able to. Just a real quick tidbit as we get into episode 2, which is about the encounter with HMS Hood. So HMS Hood, which is, of course, many people know is one of the prides of the British Navy, was named after Admiral Samuel Hood, who was an admiral much earlier in British history. Interesting thing about Admiral Samuel Hood, his great-great-grandson was Admiral Sir Horace Hood, who was killed on board the HMS Invincible at the Battle of Jutland during World War I. So I thought that was kind of an interesting connection there. And I believe there's also some connection to Mount Hood in the western United States, but I can't remember off the top of my head what that is. I'm sure somebody will mention it in the comment section below. But we're going to go ahead and dive right into part 2. If you didn't see part 1 of my reaction, the link is in the description, as well as the link to the original content creator. Make sure you give them a like when you get a chance. Here we go. Let's dive into part 2.
The HMS Hood and Prince of Wales plow toward the Bismarck and destiny. This episode is sponsored by Wargaming. Download World of Warships and use the code EXTRA1 for free goodies. Link in the description. When we left off, the British had finally located the battleship Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen as they steamed south through the Denmark Strait. And with Admiral Tovey and the rest of the home fleet still hundreds of miles away, it was clear that the Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, and Prince of Wales were the only ones that could possibly stop the behemoth. But to understand what's about to happen, we need to understand the state of the Royal Navy in 1941, and how interwar limitations held back their naval development. For that, allow me to turn things over to Wargaming's military expert, Richard Cutland.
Following World War I, a series of maritime treaties constrained naval development in hopes of defusing an international arms race. At first, these treaties limited the number of new ships and set limits on the size and armament of new vessels, but later agreements eliminated the possibility of building new battleships completely. As a result, in the interwar period, Britain was forced to modernise old ships instead of building new ones.
And we talked a little bit about that in yesterday's episode, about how the Washington Naval Treaty really just completely put a stop to this upward trajectory that was happening with the size and armament on battleships. And that in the 1930s, you see Italy, France, Germany start to kind of push the limits of that. Nominally, Bismarck was kind of within the Washington Naval Treaty. Obviously, it went over when they fully loaded it, and obviously it violated the Treaty of Versailles and things like that. But, by the 1930s, Germany's not worried about whether or not they're obeying treaties anyway. And so what you end up seeing then is a lot of these treaty compliant vessels that were built in the 1930s get refits during World War II to massively upgrade not only their armament, but their weapons, their armor, everything. Because everybody had thrown out the treaty by that point.
For example, the HMS Hood looked strong enough to any outside observer, but the British Admiralty was well aware of its main drawback, a weak horizontal defence, especially at deck 25, which was only 76mm thick. Plans to strengthen the horizontal armour had been developed back in 1927, but these works were postponed due to financial problems. In the end, they never happened at all, and this made the ship vulnerable to long-range plunging fire that fell directly down on its deck. These treaties also constrained new battleships, like Prince of Wales, to quite conservative designs. Their armament consisted of 2 4-gun turrets and 1 2-gun turret, all in a 14-inch calibre that complied with treaty limitations. Meanwhile, Germany was quietly violating these treaties with ships like Bismarck that had 15-inch guns.
Yep.
So even though Prince of Wales was brand new, it was underpowered at launch. In addition, the brand new Prince of Wales had teething problems. Sea trials revealed that her revolutionary quadruple gun turrets were prone to break down under strain, and this problem hadn't yet been fixed when she deployed with Hood. However, Prince of Wales was more technologically advanced than the Hood, particularly since she had modern rangefinders. And crucially, both Hood and Prince of Wales were fast, and speed was what the Royal Navy needed in an interception force.
So the idea there is speed is armor. And so ships like the Hood, knowing that they were vulnerable to plunging fire, the idea is use your speed to protect you, but also close range to where shots are going to hit the much more protected belt armor rather than plunging down on the thinly protected deck. But yeah, it's not a fair fight from the standpoint that you have one side with a brand new ship that has violated the treaty, and you've got the other side with one new ship and one old ship, both of which were built with treaty limitations. When the Germans aren't playing by the rules, you have an unfair fight, and that shows really quickly in this battle.
Back to you, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Cutland. So that's the situation. The capable but vulnerable Hood and untested Prince of Wales are about to take on the largest and most modern warships on Earth. 24th of May, 05:37 hours, the Denmark Strait. Our British sailors have gotten little sleep, knowing that they would intercept the Bismarck at dawn.
I want to back up for a second, because I had several people comment yesterday and say, hey, how can they say that the Bismarck is the largest battleship on Earth? What about the Yamato? Well, it's splitting hairs, of course, because by this point Yamato is getting close to being done. But Yamato's not commissioned yet. Yamato wasn't commissioned until the very end of 1941 and didn't really enter service until 1942. So there's a good year between Bismarck's completion and Yamato's completion, and so at the time that all of this is going on in May of 1941, Bismarck is the largest battleship on Earth. It just isn't the largest one ever made. Looking back from now, it was at the time.
On the Prince of Wales, civilian contractors have worked through the night repairing its turret guns, whose hydraulic systems are acting up. Most of the Prince of Wales crew are fresh recruits, and they're nervous, but the presence of the Hood stills their jitters. Just then, a lookout on Hood sees smoke on the horizon, the Bismarck and the Prinz Eugen. Admiral Holland sends a ciphered message to the rest of the fleet. From Hood, enemy in sight, am engaging. But Holland's running almost parallel to the enemy, the four ships converging slowly as they head southwest. That's no good. Not only does he need to get between Bismarck and the Atlantic, but the Hood's thin deck armor will be vulnerable to plunging fire unless he gets within 9 miles.
Yep.
By cutting a path directly toward the Germans, he'll close the distance as fast as possible and be harder to hit, but it'll also have his firepower since his rear turrets can't join the fight. But there's nothing for it. The Bismarck could still evade. Holland turns to an interception course and orders full speed ahead. At 05:52 hours, Holland orders Prince of Wales to target the lead ship. But the gunnery officer on the Prince of Wales, working with more modern optics, makes a startling realization. The Hood has targeted the wrong ship. Bismarck and Prinz Eugen have similar silhouettes, and the Germans have defied convention by sending the lighter armored heavy cruiser first. He tries to communicate this to the Hood, but it's too late. The Hood opens fire, wreathing the vessel in dirty brown smoke. Seeing this, the desperate gunnery officer defies the Hood's order, targets the Bismarck, and fires. On both ships, the gunnery officers look at their watches, waiting. 50 seconds later, pillars of water leap up in front of the German ships.
Think about that. 50 seconds. That's the distance that they're firing at. Think about how much goes into firing these things when that's the distance that they've got to cover.
Worse still, one of the guns in Prince of Wales' B turret malfunctions, taking it out of the action. Both ships are readjusting their aim when flashes of light run up and down the German ships. A long-range artillery duel has begun. 2 minutes later, a shell from Prinz Eugen crashes into the Hood's upper deck, detonating an ammunition locker. It burns with pink flames, anti-aircraft shells cooking off in bunches like firecrackers. On the Hood's bridge, the crew can hear the screams of their burning shipmates coming through the voice pipes. Admiral Holland keeps calm, but then huge columns of water leap into the air ahead of the bow, and he finally realizes that he's been shooting at the wrong ship. He hastily sends the order to retarget the Bismarck and orders a turn to port in order to bring his aft turrets to bear. It will expose him side-on with the enemy, but with luck, the Hood's turn will pass just inside the 9-mile mark and shield him from plunging fire. The turn comes just in time. Bismarck's next salvo thunders down right where the Hood had been headed. With all fire concentrated on Hood, Prince of Wales has been free to get range on the Bismarck and scores at least one hit. But her intricate 4-gun turrets aren't holding up to the strain, and every few salvos another gun goes out of action. It follows Hood into the turn, facing the German ships side on. A salvo from Bismarck brackets the Hood, shells landing on either side of the vessel. The Prince of Wales's commander, Captain Leach, knows that once a ship is bracketed, the enemy has you.
So, when you know, here's the one that's short, here's the one that's long, these are the distances we are firing, now you just gotta split the difference, and you're done for.
He sees the Bismarck's guns flash in double time, and trains his binoculars on the Hood to see the result. A shell plunges down on Hood's deck, just aft of the mainmast, and disappears. 2 seconds later, the middle of the Hood erupts like a Roman candle, spraying flames hundreds of feet in the air. As Leach looks on, horrified, a colossal explosion tears the ship in two, the stern rising up out of the water as the bow sails forward under its own momentum. Yellow smoke blankets the carnage. In all the smoke, the Hood's bridge crew don't know where they've been hit, or how badly. Bodies begin raining down on the bridge, thumping off the roof and landing on the wings. From below, the helmsman reports through a voice pipe that the steering isn't answering. The ship begins to list, first to port, and then capsizing 45 degrees to starboard. There's no need for an evacuation order. The crew lines up single file at the port side hatch, waiting their turn to scramble out. The squadron's navigating officer stands aside, letting junior seamen go first. One crewman glances back. He sees Admiral Holland still sitting in his command chair, going down with his ship. Seconds later, the sailor steps off the Hood and into the freezing water of the Denmark Strait. Above him, he sees the majestic lines of the Hood, sinking in a V formation. A turret fires a last defiant salvo before it slips into the water, and then the suction pulls him under. On the Prince of Wales, Captain Leach orders an evasive maneuver to avoid colliding with Hood's rapidly sinking stern. It disappears underwater as they pass. Nothing remains of the Royal Navy's largest and most famous ship except a burning debris field.
Imagine you're on the Prince of Wales and you see this happen. What is going through your mind in that moment? The fear. I mean, a lot of these guys, this is probably one of their first times in combat. They already know they're facing this brand new, huge battleship that is such a threat that the whole Royal Navy is concentrating on trying to deal with it. And they see Hood basically get, it wasn't really one-shotted, it was two-shotted because they'd been hit by the Prinz Eugen, but the first shot from Bismarck just splits the ship in half and sinks it and kills almost everybody on board. I can't imagine the fear that must have been going through the guys on the Prince of Wales, especially as your guns are malfunctioning and you know, starting to have problems as well. It just must have been a horrifying situation.
Field. It is now one malfunctioning ship against two, and Leach has sailed right into the Hood's former position. The Germans barely have to adjust their rangefinders. But just then, a salvo from Prince of Wales straddles Bismarck. Leach nods approval. Now that Prince of Wales has the correct range, she can... Bang! One compartment below the bridge, the navigation officer hears a crash above him. He shouts into the voice pipe, asking if everything's all right. At first, there's no answer, and then a stream of blood dribbles out, staining his charts. Leach gets unsteadily to his feet. One of the Bismarck's shells has hit the bridge and passed through without exploding. His entire bridge crew lies dead, except for 2 wounded officers. For 3 hellish minutes, shells pound the Prince of Wales. The armor belt takes multiple hits. The boat deck catches fire. In one of the turret magazines, a shell punches through the deck and lands, still live, next to a sailor's foot. The magazine crew is told to hang on to it until ordnance disposal arrives, but they're not waiting.
No.
They lift the shell up out of the turret and gingerly carry it across the deck amid a full-scale battle.
Jeez.
With a sigh of relief, they pitch it over the side. Captain Leach knows he's been outfought. He turns to withdraw, making smoke to cover his retreat. The Bismarck, curiously, does not follow. Keeping well out of range, Leach brings the mauled Prince of Wales around to join the cruisers shadowing Bismarck.
It's an interesting decision that Admiral Lutyens makes not to pursue Prince of Wales, but understand their job is to break out into the Atlantic. Their job is not to engage these capital ships of the British Navy. Their job is to get out into the Atlantic and disrupt Allied shipping. So they're going to focus on what they're supposed to do now that they have cleared the danger.
He signals the Admiralty. Hood has blown up. 1 hour after the Hood's sinking, a destroyer arrives to look for survivors. On deck, they have rafts, lifebelts, and blankets lined up and ready. The medical crew is prepared to treat hundreds. Instead, they pull 3 oil-slicked survivors out of the water. 3 out of a crew of 1,418. 10:22 hours, the Admiralty. Faces are grim in the Admiralty's war room, 200 feet below the streets of London. The shock of losing the Hood is compounded by the knowledge that German battleships were now in position to prey on vital convoys. But as the news settles in, bleak horror gives way to determined rage. The phone rings. It's Prime Minister Churchill with a personal order for every able ship in the Atlantic. It is direct and to the point. Admiralty cipher officers broadcast the order wide. The aircraft carrier Ark Royal receives the signal at Gibraltar and begins to unpack its torpedo bombers. Tovey's home fleet receives the message as they race to join the stricken Prince of Wales. The battleship Rodney, headed for a refit in Boston, gets the signal and slowly turns its 16-inch guns back toward Europe. The airwaves are thick with this one message. Sink the Bismarck. Sink the Bismarck. Sink the Bismarck.
It's a manhunt. It is. I mean, this is one of the most concentrated naval efforts to sink one ship in history. I can't really think of another comparable situation. I mean, maybe you talk about the Allies hunting down Yamato in the Pacific, but I don't think anything was like this. I mean, you've got ships coming from Gibraltar down there, the Mediterranean, the entrance to the Mediterranean on the south of Spain. The Ark Royal, which will play a huge role in eventually finding and disabling Bismarck. So pretty fascinating stuff. And there's a couple of things I learned there that I didn't know before, so that was kind of cool. But I would love to hear your thoughts. Let me know. Use the comment section below, and we will be back again with part 3 as we continue this incredible journey. Thanks for watching.